Layla never expected that speaking her mother tongue at a Christmas party would lead to the most shocking revelation of her life. When the wealthy guests laughed at her Arabic words and called her an outsider, they had no idea that her quiet husband held power beyond their wildest imagination. What happened next left everyone speechless. Layla Hassan adjusted the modest black cardigan over her simple red dress as she stood before the mirror in their small Brooklyn apartment. Christmas music drifted from the radio in the kitchen, where her husband Omar was making tea, humming along to the familiar melodies. She touched the delicate gold necklace her grandmother had given her years ago in Damascus, the only piece of jewelry she owned that held real value, though not the kind these people at tonight's party would recognize. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Omar appeared in the doorway holding 2 steaming cups, his gentle smile warming her more than any expensive gift ever could. He wore a plain navy sweater she had bought him from Target last year and khaki pants that had seen better days. His watch was a simple Timex. His shoes were scuffed leather loafers that he resold rather than replaced. Everything about her husband spoke of careful spending and humble living. They had been married for 3 years now, and Layla still marveled at how she had found such a kind man in this sprawling city. Omar worked as what he called a business advisor, helping small companies organize their finances and plan for growth. He was often vague about his clients, saying most of his work involved boring spreadsheets and meetings that would put her to sleep. She worked as a translator for the city's immigrant services office, helping new arrivals navigate everything from housing applications to medical appointments. Their love story had begun at a community center in Queens, where Layla volunteered teaching English to recent immigrants. Omar had shown up one evening claiming he wanted to help with financial literacy workshops for the families. He spoke Arabic fluently, which surprised her, and when she asked about it, he mentioned spending time in the Middle East for work, but never elaborated. What struck her most was how he listened to every person's story with genuine interest, never checking his phone or seeming impatient when the sessions ran long. Their courtship had been refreshingly traditional. Omar would bring small gifts, never expensive ones, perhaps a book he thought she would enjoy or baklava from the Lebanese bakery near her apartment. He insisted on meeting her parents over video calls to Damascus, speaking respectfully with her father in formal Arabic that impressed them both. When he proposed, it was with a simple gold band that he said reminded him of the traditional Syrian jewelry her grandmother might have worn. The wedding was small, held at the community center where they met, with just a few friends and families joining via video call from Syria. Omar's family, he explained, lived far away and couldn't travel, but his sister had sent a beautiful embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift. Layla had never pressed him about his relatives, understanding that some families were complicated, some relationships strained by distance and circumstance. They settled into married life easily, splitting grocery costs and rent on their one-bedroom apartment. Omar contributed more than his share, but Layla assumed his consulting work paid better than her government job. He had a habit of paying for things in cash, always seeming to have crisp bills in his wallet, but she figured some of his clients preferred cash payments to avoid bank fees. Small business owners often operated that way. Tonight was different from their usual quiet evenings. Margaret Wellington, one of Omar's clients, had invited them to her annual Christmas party at her estate in the Hamptons. Layla had been surprised when Omar mentioned the invitation, since he rarely talked about specific clients, but he said Margaret had been particularly grateful for his help expanding her boutique hotel business and insisted they attend. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours in Omar's aging Honda Civic, the car struggling slightly on the highway hills. Layla watched expensive cars pass them, BMWs and Mercedes that probably cost more than they made in 2 years combined. She felt a familiar flutter of nervousness about fitting in with Omar's wealthier clients, but he reached over and squeezed her hand reassuringly. Margaret Wellington's estate was breathtaking in a way that made Layla's chest tighten with anxiety. The mansion looked like something from a movie, with towering columns and windows that glowed warmly against the winter evening. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway, their paint gleaming under elegant landscape lighting. Omar parked their Honda between a Porsche and a Range Rover, and Layla tried not to feel embarrassed about the dent in their rear bumper. Inside, the house was even more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light across marble floors, and a Christmas tree that must have cost more than their monthly rent dominated the foyer. Women glided past in designer dresses that probably cost more than Layla's entire wardrobe, their jewelry catching the light with every movement. Men in perfectly tailored suits discussed business deals in vacation homes with the casual confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Margaret Wellington greeted them at the door, a woman in her 50s with expertly styled silver hair and a dress that screamed expensive simplicity. She embraced Omar warmly, thanking him again for his invaluable advice on his hotel expansion, then turned to Layla with a polite but measured smile. Layla immediately felt the subtle assessment in the woman's eyes, taking in her Target dress and drugstore makeup with the kind of swift judgment that wealthy women had perfected. Omar guided her through the party, introducing her to various guests as his wife, the translator. Most people smiled politely and moved on quickly, their interest clearly focused on Omar's business connections rather than getting to know her personally. She found herself gravitating towards the quiet corners, nursing a glass of wine and watching the social dynamics unfold around her. It was near the piano where she met Sophia, Margaret's daughter, who had just returned from studying abroad in London. Sophia was beautiful in that effortless way that came from good genes and better skincare, wearing a black dress that was clearly designer but understated enough to avoid looking like she was trying too hard. She was genuinely interested in Layla's work as a translator, asking thoughtful questions about the refugee families she helped. As they talked, Sophia mentioned struggling with Arabic pronunciation in her Middle Eastern Studies course. Without thinking, Layla offered to help, switching naturally into Arabic to demonstrate the proper pronunciation of several difficult words. Her voice carried the melodic cadence of Damascus Arabic, the dialect she had learned from her grandmother's lullabies and her mother's bedtime stories. The conversation flowed naturally between English and Arabic, as Layla explained the subtle differences in pronunciation, her face lighting up with the joy she always felt when sharing her language and culture. She was so focused on helping Sophia that she didn't notice the small crowd that had gathered around them, drawn by the sound of her voice speaking in her native tongue. When she finally looked up, she saw 5 women watching her with expressions that made her stomach drop. Rebecca Sterling, a real estate mogul's wife, wore a look of barely concealed disgust. Patricia Blackwood, whose husband owned a chain of high-end restaurants, had her phone out, clearly recording. Jennifer Morrison, a socialite whose family had old money dating back generations, whispered something to her companion that made them both laugh.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How interesting that you're speaking that language here," she said, emphasizing that language like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "I just think it's so important for people to speak English when they're guests in American homes, don't you think?" Layla felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could respond, Patricia jumped in. "Oh, I'm sure she speaks English perfectly well," she said with mock reassurance. "It's just that some people feel more comfortable reverting to their natural languages when they get excited." The word natural dripped with condescension, as if Layla were some exotic animal displaying instinctive behavior. Jennifer laughed, a sound like ice clinking in crystal. "I took French in boarding school, and even I know better than to break into it at parties. It's just basic etiquette, really, when in Rome and all that." She turned to her friend with an exaggerated whisper that was clearly meant to be overheard. "Though I suppose not everyone learns proper social etiquette growing up." Sophia tried to intervene, explaining that she had asked Layla to help with pronunciation, but Rebecca waved her off dismissively. "Darling, you're too kind to make excuses for her. We all understand that some people just don't know any better." The comments escalated quickly from there. Patricia mentioned how uncomfortable it made her when people spoke foreign languages in public, wondering aloud what they might be plotting. Jennifer suggested that people who couldn't be bothered to assimilate properly maybe shouldn't attend events with established American families. Rebecca nodded along, adding that she certainly wouldn't feel comfortable having someone in her home who insisted on speaking languages she couldn't understand. Every word felt like a physical blow to Layla. She had faced discrimination before, subtle and not so subtle, but never so publicly, and never while surrounded by such wealth and supposed sophistication. These women, with their designer clothes and perfect makeup, were saying things that would have been condemned if spoken by anyone else, but their money and social status seemed to give them permission to voice their prejudices openly. The worst part was how they made their bigotry sound reasonable, even polite. They weren't screaming slurs or making obvious threats. Instead, they wrapped their hatred in concerns about etiquette and social norms, making Layla feel like she was overreacting to what they would surely claim were innocent observations. Omar had been across the room speaking with Margaret about her hotel project when the confrontation began, but something must have drawn his attention because suddenly he was there, moving through the crowd with purposeful steps. Layla expected him to take her arm and quietly suggest they leave, maybe make polite excuses about an early morning or a long drive home. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The moment Omar reached the group, the entire dynamic shifted. His usual gentle demeanor disappeared, replaced by something Layla had never seen before. He didn't raise his voice or make any threatening gestures, but his presence suddenly commanded the attention of everyone nearby. "Ladies," he said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, "I believe you owe my wife an apology." Rebecca laughed nervously, clearly taken aback by his tone. "Oh, we were just having a friendly conversation about language etiquette. No offense was intended. I'm sure your wife understands." Omar's expression didn't change, but somehow the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "My wife was helping Sophia with her Arabic pronunciation, which is exactly the kind of generous spirit that makes her remarkable. What you ladies just displayed, however, is something else entirely." Patricia stepped forward, her confidence returning as she remembered her social position. "Now see here, we were simply pointing out that it's more appropriate to speak English at American social gatherings. Surely you can understand our perspective." What happened next would replay in Layla's mind for months afterward. Omar reached into his jacket pocket, not for the basic cell phone he usually carried, but for something sleek and expensive that she had never seen before. He made a call, speaking in a voice so quiet that only those closest could hear, but somehow his words carried weight that made everyone strain to listen. "Yes, this is Omar. I'm at the Wellington Estate in East Hampton. I need you to pull the files on Sterling Properties, the Blackwood Restaurant Group, and Morrison Holdings, immediately." The color drained from Rebecca's face so quickly that Layla thought she might faint. Patricia grabbed Jennifer's arm, whispering urgently in her ear, while her eyes darted between Omar and the phone in his hand. Jennifer took an actual step backward, her previous confidence evaporating like morning mist. Margaret Wellington appeared at Omar's side as if summoned by some invisible signal, her face pale with what looked like recognition and fear. "Your Highness," she said quietly, and Layla's world tilted on its axis. "I had no idea. Please, let me handle this situation immediately." "Your Highness." The words echoed in Layla's mind as she stared at her husband, this man she had shared a bed with for 3 years, who worried about their grocery budget and drove a car with a dented bumper.
The man who made her tea every morning and fell asleep reading library books was being called Your Highness by one of the most powerful women in the Hamptons. Rebecca was frantically making phone calls now, her voice shrill with panic as she stepped away from the group. Patricia and Jennifer huddled together, their faces masks of fear and confusion as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The party continued around them, but Layla felt like she was watching everything through a fog of disbelief. Omar ended his call and turned to face the 3 women who had humiliated his wife just minutes before. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, though he never raised it above a conversational tone. "You will find that your husband's businesses face some interesting challenges in the coming weeks," he said calmly. "Bank loans may become difficult to renew. Permits might face unexpected delays. Key partnerships could dissolve without explanation. Jennifer found her voice first, though it shook with desperation. "Who are you? What are you talking about?" Omar's smile was gentle, but his eyes held something that made all three women step backward. "I'm someone who believes that when you attack a person's language, their culture, their very identity, you reveal exactly who you are. And I'm someone who has the power to ensure that revelation has consequences." As the three women hurried away, making frantic phone calls and whispering among themselves, Layla stood frozen in the middle of the elegant Christmas party, staring at the man she thought she knew. The gentle business consultant who helped small companies was gone, replaced by someone who could make powerful people tremble with fear. Margaret Wellington approached them cautiously, her previous warmth replaced by nervous deference. "Your Highness, please allow me to escort you and the princess to somewhere more private. We have much to discuss." Princess. Layla's legs felt weak as the word hit her. She wasn't just married to someone with money or influence. According to Margaret Wellington, she had married royalty, and she had been living in complete ignorance of that fact for 3 years. Omar took her arm gently, his touch as familiar as ever despite everything that had just been revealed. "Come, Habibti," he said softly, using the Arabic endearment that had always made her smile. "It's time I told you everything." The car ride back to Manhattan was silent, except for the hum of the Honda's engine and Layla's racing thoughts. Omar drove with the same careful attention he always had, but everything felt different now. The man beside him, who had spent 3 years clipping grocery store coupons and repairing their second-hand furniture, had just been called Your Highness by one of the most influential women in New York society. When they reached their small Brooklyn apartment, Omar parked in their usual spot under the flickering streetlight and sat motionless for several minutes. His hands gripped the steering wheel of the dented Honda, and Layla could see him struggling with how to begin the conversation that would change everything between them. Finally, he turned to face her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of love and something that looked almost like grief. "Layla Hayati, there are things about me that I have hidden from you. Things I should have told you before we married, but I was terrified of losing you." Inside their tiny apartment, surrounded by the IKEA furniture they had assembled together and the wedding photos from their simple ceremony, Omar began to unravel the carefully constructed life they had built together. He sat across from her at their small kitchen table, the same table where they shared breakfast every morning and planned their modest budget every month. "My name is Omar Hassan al-Rashid. I am the third son of King Khalid al-Rashid of Kadesh, a small but wealthy nation in the Gulf region. My family controls oil reserves with approximately $200 billion, and I am the director of our sovereign wealth fund, which has investments in nearly every major industry across 6 continents. Layla stared at him, trying to process words that seemed to belong in a movie rather than her real life. The man who had worried about the cost of their anniversary dinner was telling her he controlled billions of dollars. The husband who drove a 12-year-old Honda was royalty from a country she had only heard mentioned in international news reports. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We live in a 1-bedroom apartment. You fix our broken toaster instead of buying a new one. You use coupons at the grocery store." Omar's smile was sad and tender. "Because that's who I wanted to be with you, Layla. I've been wealthy my entire life, surrounded by people who only saw my title and my family's money. I was raised in palaces, educated at the finest schools in Europe, and groomed to take over portions of our family's business empire." He reached across the table and took her hands in his, the same gentle touch that she had fallen in love with. "When I came to New York for graduate school at Columbia, I decided to live like a normal person for the first time in my life. I rented a small apartment, bought used furniture, learned to cook for myself. It was the most freedom I had ever experienced." The pieces of their relationship began falling into place with stunning clarity. His fluent classical Arabic that had impressed her father, the expensive-looking documents she sometimes glimpsed in his briefcase, the way he never seemed stressed about money despite their modest lifestyle, his mysterious clients who apparently included some of the most powerful business owners in the city. The community center.
You weren't there to volunteer. You were there for business. Omar nodded reluctantly. Our family foundation funds community programs across the city. I was conducting site visits to determine which organizations deserved continued support. But when I saw you teaching those families, helping them navigate their new lives with such patience and kindness, I forgot all about business assessments. He told her about watching her from the back of the room during that first English class, how she had spent an extra hour helping an elderly Syrian man practice pronouncing American addresses so he could find his doctor's office, how she had given her own phone number to a young mother who was struggling to communicate with her child's teacher. You treated every person in that room like they mattered, Omar continued. Not because of what they could do for you, but simply because they were human beings, deserving of respect and assistance. I had never seen anything like it in my world. Over the following weeks, Omar revealed he had returned to every workshop and community event, finding excuses to extend his foundation's evaluation period. He began volunteering genuinely, using his financial expertise to help immigrant families understand American banking systems and credit requirements. When I finally asked you for coffee, I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life, he admitted. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals with world leaders, but the thought of you rejecting me terrified me more than anything I had ever faced. Their courtship had been Omar's first experience with authentic love, free from the calculations and ulterior motives that had characterized every other relationship in his life. When Layla loved him, she loved the man who helped her carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs, not a prince who could buy her entire apartment building without checking his bank balance. So when you said you were saving up for my engagement ring, Layla said slowly, understanding flooding through her, I bought it from a street vendor in Queens because I wanted to propose to you the way any ordinary man would, Omar finished. I wanted our love to be real, based on who we were together, not what my family's wealth could provide. The revelation explained so much about their marriage. Omar's insistence on their small courthouse wedding hadn't been about saving money, but about avoiding the elaborate royal protocols that would have accompanied any official ceremony. His vague descriptions of his work weren't due to modesty, but because he spent his days managing investments larger than most countries' annual budgets. Every morning, for 3 years, I have left our apartment and going to board meetings where I discuss oil futures and infrastructure projects, Omar said. Then I come home to you, and for a few hours each day, I get to be just a man who loves his wife and helps her decide what to cook for dinner. Layla felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her husband had sacrificed to maintain their simple life together. He had given up palaces and private jets and the deference that came with his title, all to experience the kind of authentic love that money couldn't buy. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Because I was terrified you would change, Omar said simply. Everyone changes when they discover my real identity. They start wanting things, expecting things, becoming someone different to match what they think a royal spouse should be. I couldn't bear the thought of losing the woman I fell in love with. Over the following days, Layla watched her husband orchestrate a response to the Christmas party incident that was both subtle and devastating. He didn't make threats or dramatic gestures. Instead, he used the vast network of business relationships and financial influence that came with managing a sovereign wealth fund worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Rebecca Sterling's husband owned Sterling Properties, one of the largest luxury real estate development companies on the East Coast. Within a week of the party, 3 of his major construction loans were called in early due to changed risk assessments by the banking consortium that held them. His permits for a flagship development in Manhattan faced unexpected regulatory challenges that would delay groundbreaking by at least 18 months. The prime waterfront property he had been negotiating to purchase was suddenly acquired by a mysterious overseas investment firm that outbid him by 30%. Patricia Blackwood's restaurant empire began experiencing a cascade of problems that seemed unrelated but created a pattern of mounting pressure. Her suppliers, many of whom had contracts with companies in Omar's investment portfolio, began experiencing delivery delays and quality control issues. Health inspectors, following legitimate complaints from anonymous sources, found violations that required costly corrections across multiple locations. Her lease renewals at several high-end shopping centers were suddenly subject to new terms that tripled her monthly payments. Jennifer Morrison's family wealth was old money, built on shipping and logistics companies that had operated for generations. Her husband's maritime insurance became prohibitively expensive when Lloyd's of London revised their risk assessments based on new data about shipping route security. Key partnerships with international trading companies dissolved when those firms decided to consolidate their American operations with different logistics providers. Government contracts that had been routine renewals for decades were suddenly subject to competitive bidding processes that somehow always favored other companies. None of the consequences could be traced directly back to Omar or his family's business interests. The beauty of controlling such vast and diverse investments was that influence could be exercised through dozens of degrees of separation. A word to a banking partner, a suggestion to an insurance consortium, a recommendation to shift procurement priorities, all of it flowing through the normal channels of international business. The three women from the Christmas party began connecting the dots within 2 weeks. Rebecca was the first to understand what was happening when her husband's business attorney mentioned rumors about powerful Gulf investors pulling support from projects associated with companies that had demonstrated cultural insensitivity. Patricia figured it out when a business journalist asked her for comment on whether her restaurant group's recent challenges were related to her family's social media posts about immigration and language issues. Jennifer's realization came when her mother, a woman with deep connections in New York's social hierarchy, called to ask what exactly had happened at Margaret Wellington's Christmas party and whether Jennifer had somehow offended Middle Eastern royalty. The phone calls to Omar began immediately. Routed through his official office in Manhattan, a gleaming tower that Layla had never seen, despite walking past it countless times on her way to work. His assistant, a woman with decades of experience managing diplomatic communications, politely informed each caller that His Royal Highness was not available for meetings with private citizens. Margaret Wellington, desperate to minimize the diplomatic incident that had occurred in her home, arranged a formal meeting through proper channels. She contacted the cultural attaché at the United Nations, who reached out to the Kadishi consulate, who eventually scheduled an official appointment for the three women to offer their apologies. The meeting took place in Omar's actual office, a space that occupied the entire top floor of one of Manhattan's most prestigious buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, while priceless Middle Eastern art adorned walls lined with first-edition books in Arabic, English, and French. The conference table was carved from a single piece of Lebanese cedar, surrounded by chairs that had been handcrafted by master artisans in Damascus.
Layla insisted on attending, not as the humble translator these women had mocked, but as the princess she had unknowingly been for 3 years. She wore a dress that Omar's personal stylist had selected, elegant and expensive, but not ostentatious, paired with jewelry from his family's collection that was worth more than most people's annual salaries. When Rebecca, Patricia, and Jennifer were escorted into the office by Omar's security detail, they looked like pale shadows of the confident women who had humiliated Layla just weeks before. Gone were the designer gowns and perfect makeup. There were conservative business attire and expressions of desperate hope mixed with barely contained fear. Rebecca spoke first, her voice shaking as she addressed Omar with the formal protocols that someone had clearly coached her to use. "Your Royal Highness, we are here to offer our most sincere apologies for our inexcusable behavior at Mrs. Wellington's gathering. We spoke out of ignorance and prejudice, and we deeply regret any offense we caused to you and Her Royal Highness." Omar sat behind his massive desk, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than their Honda, but his expression remained the same gentle demeanor Layla had fallen in love with.
"You're apologizing because you discovered my title," he said calmly. "But what you did to my wife was wrong, regardless of who I am." Patricia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "You're absolutely right, Your Highness. We were cruel and small-minded. We attacked Princess Layla for sharing her beautiful language and culture, and there is no excuse for that behavior." "My wife was helping a young woman with her Arabic pronunciation," Omar continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "She was sharing knowledge and kindness, exactly the kind of generous spirit that makes her remarkable. What you ladies demonstrated was something far different." Jennifer was sobbing openly now. "Please, Your Highness, we understand that our actions were reprehensible. We will do anything to make amends. Our families, our businesses, they employed thousands of people who shouldn't suffer because of our stupidity." Layla watched these three women who had made her feel small and unwelcome, now begging for mercy from the man they had dismissed as insignificant just weeks before. Part of her felt satisfied seeing them experience the same humiliation they had inflicted on her, but a larger part felt something unexpected: pity. "I want them to understand," Layla said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the office, "what it feels like to be judged and found wanting by people who think they're superior." Omar nodded and turned back to the three women. "You will each make public apologies, not just for what you did to my wife, but for the broader pattern of discrimination and prejudice you represent. You will donate substantial portions of your family wealth to organizations that support immigrant communities and language preservation programs." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "And you will never, ever treat another person the way you treated my wife, regardless of their appearance, their accent, or their background." The women agreed to everything immediately, thanking Omar repeatedly for his mercy and promising to fulfill every requirement. As they left the office, still crying and expressing their gratitude, Layla felt a strange mixture of justice and sadness. Over the following months, each woman fulfilled her commitments publicly and completely. Rebecca's apology was published in major newspapers, acknowledging her xenophobic behavior and announcing her family's establishment of a scholarship fund for immigrant students. Patricia donated millions to Arabic language preservation programs and hired a diverse management team for her restaurants. Jennifer's foundation began focusing specifically on helping refugee families integrate into American communities while maintaining their cultural identities. But the real change was in how Layla saw herself and her place in the world. She had learned that her husband's love was so deep that he had hidden billions of dollars and a royal title just to experience authentic affection. She had also learned that she possessed a strength and dignity that no amount of wealth or social status could diminish. Omar gradually introduced her to his real world, but always on her terms and always with the understanding that their love remained rooted in the simple moments they shared. They kept the small Brooklyn apartment as a retreat from the obligations of his official life, a place where Prince Omar al-Rashid could disappear and just be the man who made tea for his wife every morning. The Christmas party incident became a turning point in Layla's understanding of power and respect. She realized that true strength wasn't about having money or titles, but about choosing how to use whatever influence you possessed. The three women had used their social power to hurt someone they perceived as vulnerable. Omar had used his vast resources to defend someone he loved. Most importantly, she learned that love wasn't about sharing every secret immediately. Sometimes it was about protecting what mattered most. Omar had kept his wealth and title hidden, not to deceive her, but to preserve something precious between them, something that money couldn't buy and power couldn't create. The wine stain had long since been cleaned from her red Christmas dress, but the lessons from that night remained with Layla forever. She learned that respect should be given freely, regardless of someone's appearance or accent. She discovered that quiet people often possess the most power, and she understood that the strongest love is built not on what someone can provide, but on who they choose to be when no one is watching. Her Arabic language, once mocked by wealthy strangers, became a bridge between worlds as she took on new roles in Omar's philanthropic work. She used her skills as a translator to help his family's foundation support immigrant communities across the globe, turning the very thing she had been humiliated for into a tool for helping others. The quiet translator who had been mocked for speaking her mother tongue became a princess, not through marriage alone, but through the recognition that she had always possessed the dignity and grace that no amount of money or social cruelty could buy or destroy.